All right, so we're going to go over a couple of these, then we're going to do some exercises, go over a couple more, do some exercises, same thing that we kind of normally always do. All right, so the 0th law, just like the laws of thermodynamics. Footwork is the most efficient form of head movement. And when we talk about footwork, because we're doing footwork this entire week, the same rule applies there too. Why? Because head movement and footwork are inextricably linked. So, first rule here. Use body-initiated head movement to augment the footwork. So when you see people moving like this, you should be doing that to augment what your feet are doing. And we'll see later, you don't want that to become a distraction. You'll see people burn a lot of energy just hopping around for no reason. And while oftentimes that's a stylistic choice, it's not always the best or the most efficient choice. Secondly, miss by an inch, miss by a mile. What does that mean? That means if you can make your opponent miss just by a little bit and you're still in position to counter, that means you're being efficient with your head movement. So a lot of the times people overslip. Well, it turns out that the penalty for overslipping and underslipping is the same. You're probably going to get hit. If you underslip, at least typically you're still going to be in range or in good position to be able to counter. So if you get hit, but then you make sure that they get hit too, you're doing a lot for being able to score. All right, and third, don't let your head movement interfere with your ability to offend. And that just means if you're trying to employ your offense and you're too busy doing a bunch of extra movement, you're not doing yourself any favors. Because what's going to happen is you're going to put yourself in bad position by moving your head in a dumb time, and then you're going to get hit. So now what we're going to do is we're going to integrate foot movement and head movement. So we're going to do a angle change integrated with a level change, right? So I'm going to come by and show you what that means. So in brief summary, what we just worked on was throwing a double jab, closing the distance, working on changing level while we came in on that jab, and throwing the second jab when the trailing foot came in, standing up, second jab goes to the head. So that kind of covered some of those things. Then we talked, at least for you, Jeff, what do you do after that? Well, if you want to cross the center line, it's probably going to be good to change level again while you're crossing the center line and bringing a punch with you. We'll talk about that in a minute, and then everybody's going to get to try that. All right, so don't waste energy on unnecessary movement, head or otherwise. So we kind of briefly touched on that earlier. You'll see a lot of guys hopping around, burning off nervous energy. Well, they're burning off energy, and it can be good to a point, but it can also be exhausting. So if you're going to be moving, make sure you're moving with deliberate intent. And intent is kind of a big part of dictating the terms of every engagement to your opponent, is you have to understand that you are the one whose every effort is deliberate, right? You're not just doing things for no reason. All right, if you cannot avoid getting hit, at least reduce the impact. So when you talk about rolling with the punches, well, you can roll with punches, which means trying to roll away from them. You can also roll into punches to choke the punch. And both of them have more appropriate or less appropriate times to be used, kind of depending on the circumstances, but it's good to be able to do both. And those are something that you can also augment with footwork. You can step slightly out, lead the shoulder in, and pull in as tight a guard as possible. All right, use foot pivots to sharpen head movement. So when we talk about slipping and rolling, you're going to make your movement a lot better by using a foot to pivot to help sharpen the move. This is just going to make it more explosive. It's going to make it faster. And it's definitely going to help, especially if you're adding punches, because you're going to be throwing punches while you're doing these head movements, ideally. And especially if you're trying to turn offline, it's going to help both make the punch harder and to quicken your head movement. So we're going to work on that next. We're going to cross the center line while using a level change to have offensive defense and defensive offense. All right? Let's start that now. All right, so now, breaking up the rhythm of your head movements. So what you'll see a lot of times is people will kind of wind up just doing this, right? And having passive head movement is in no means a bad thing. But what's better than just having the same rhythm is to change it. Because when you do that, now all of a sudden people can't hit you, because they know where your head's going to be and when it's going to be there. Does that make sense? Because people just will figure out your pattern. Keep your damn hands up even when you're moving your head. I've seen so many boxers who think it looks cool to drop their hands when they slip. And sure it does, but guess what happens if your slip doesn't work? Bang, right? So just keep your hands up. They don't have to be here, right? But keep them up, because sometimes your slip doesn't work, or sometimes the other guy figures you out. And if you don't prepare for that, you're just training stupidly. All right, your eyes are your fastest defensive tool. Don't block your own vision. We'll see people, when they get overwhelmed, come into a shell like this where they can't see anything. If at all possible, and it takes some practice to do it, pull your shell back so that you can see. You're more worried about the hooks and the uppercuts than you are about the straight punches. So move your head, use that head movement that we're working on, but then use your hands back here so you can see. Because if you're here and you can take the hook like this because you see it coming, it's a whole lot better than being here, having a giant hole for your opponent to throw the hook through, and then him knocking you out because you can't see the punch coming. All right. Lastly, always move your head offline with throwing straight punches. We did that with the 1s and 2s. And change levels when moving laterally. When you're moving to your side, it's generally a good idea to move your head down a little bit or to change level in some way, so that you're just not in position, because coming straight across your opponent's center line is inherently dangerous. You always want to bring something with you, and some of the times, at least that you're doing it, you want to change level, because it makes it harder for your opponent to be able to see you moving into a shot that he could try to hit you with. That's how I had this tooth knocked out, was I rolled into what was a Mexican hook, half uppercut, half hook. Got me right there, cracked my tooth in half. I had to pull it out. So that's why we also keep our hands up while we're moving our head. So now, the next thing that we're going to work on, watching that, it did help inspire 2 more. Squat, don't bend. Right? So we have a tendency, especially as our legs fatigue, to start doing our head movement by bending the spine. Understandably so, because if you're not doing a whole bunch of squats and training every day, you're going to fatigue in the muscles that you need to do these things. When you train correctly, throwing a right hand, you get this blasting muscle right here that while you're training will get super sore. It'll actually fatigue faster than just about anything else. It's just because you don't do this very much, right? This is not a common action. Which is why a lot of people don't do it. And then their right hand suffers because they try to transfer their weight to their lead side and they get hit in the teeth. So anyway, squat, don't bend. Squat. The more you can keep your spine upright, the better. Now, while you're standing in your fight stance, it's okay to drop down to the rear side a little bit. It's not necessary, but for people that like to fight off the back foot, it's more comfortable. I much prefer a balance of weight between the feet. And then, lastly, most movement benefits from changing as many dimensions as possible. So whatever you're doing, so like what we were just doing, we were talking about what's called a pull counter. You throw 1, 2, and you come back. You either take a step back or you do a lean, which is less tactically sound, but a lot of pros do it. And because they're fast enough, they could get away with it. Or you could come offline. You could do 1, 2, lateral step, 2. Now, if you want to enhance that, you throw the 1, 2, and then you take a slight angle and you roll into it. Now what happens is you're rolling underneath the opponent's punch. You come over top with an overhand or a cross because you've changed your foot position. You're no longer feet parallel, now you're feet perpendicular. Anyway, but like you want to change as many dimensions as possible. So when you're changing angles in front of your opponent, it's best to do so by adding that level change, right? So that means you're working 2 dimensions. When you can work 3 dimensions, that's even better, but that's not always feasible because if you come out of range while you're coming across the center line, it's more protective, but now you're also going to have to close again to be able to engage. So there's pros and cons to all these things, but these are just considerations that I want you to think about while you're doing all these activities, and it will definitely enhance your offense and your defense because the two are inextricably linked, right? What's the purpose of defense?
Get in a position for offense and protect yourself, one, and get yourself in a position.
Forget about protect yourself. The purpose of defense is to enable a better offense. That's it. Period. All right, good work.